Everybody in?
Son.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us online. If you're coming via Zoom, we do have an in-person quorum. Trustee Freimark is joining us from away this evening. Hello to him. Thank you for coming in if you're joining us tonight. Any announcements from anyone? Are there any?
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
That better? Yeah. Next is the opportunity to add or modify the agenda. Any requests? None. On to board business. The first item is approval of resolution 8-2025, updating chapter 118 taxation. We held a public hearing last week. Closed the public hearing, simply a codifying of the new code. I will move it. I'll move for adoption. Resolution 08-2025, adopting local law 1 of 2025, first one of the year, amending chapter 118 taxation. Second? Oh, well, you're in a read.
Second.
Okay, no, you can't.
Oh, good, second.
Again. And just for clarification, for the public, that wasn't being mean to trustee Eliza.
She's always being mean.
Refusing because she's part of the fire company. Whereas the Village of Cold Spring Board of Trustees has caused to be prepared a draft of a local law to amend chapter 118, taxation of the village code. And whereas a local law providing for partial tax exemption upon real property based upon the owner's volunteer membership in the Village of Cold Spring Fire Company and or the Phillipstown, we need to address the spelling, Volunteer Ambulance Corps pursuant to section 466A of the real property tax law. And whereas the Village of Cold Spring Board of Trustees held a duly noticed public hearing on the draft local law on February 19th, 2025. Whereas the Village of Cold Spring Board of Trustees has complied with the requirements of the State Environmental Quality Review Act, SECRA, as it applies to the adoption of the draft local law. Now therefore be it resolved that local law number 1, 2025 is hereby adopted and the village clerk is authorized and directed to take all of the actions necessary to complete the local law adoption procedure, including filing said local law with the New York State Office of the Secretary of State. I have moved, I believe Trustee Posey has seconded, and it's a roll call vote.
Trustee Starbuck is abstaining. Trustee Phillips Woods.
I also have to abstain.
Mayor Foley.
Aye.
Trustee Posey.
Aye.
Trustee Freimark.
Aye.
Right, I believe the ayes have it. There's 2 abstentions.
And thank you for the serving of your families.
Kathleen, I think you did want to modify the agenda at one point. Is that still the case?
No, it's here, it's on there. Approval of managed technologies quote. Oh, could you put that on without a vote? So this is an addition. Thank you, Aaron. This is an addition to the agenda. After Monday, the clerk has put it on the agenda, but it is an addition related to, we have a grant for the police department. We've had it for about a year. We're down to the last dregs of it. It needs to be used for technology. And so the officer in charge has requested modems, new modems in the car, so they have a more stable connection for the CAD system, etc. So making a motion to add that. Second. In favor? Aye.
Aye.
I have a quote here. Thank you, Aaron. We have a quote from the recommendation from the officer in charge and a quote from Managed Technologies, who does our technology, all of our overall technology, and the amount of $12,383. The grant covers just the technology and not the labor, which has been the case with all of the other equipment that we put in, the camera in the tunnel, the cameras at Mayor's Park, cameras here at Village Hall. So this is for, it's roughly $9,000 for the equipment, right?
Yes.
Would someone like to make a motion?
I make a motion to approve the Managed Technologies quote 1872 for police equipment in the amount of $12,383.
Second. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, and we have with us tonight, I think, 3 members of the planning board and chair.
Hillary's
Charles. And Hillary is joining us online. Hi, Hillary. so 4 members of the planning board. They have asked to come to us and present their findings on the BGEIS, and I assume you're also submitting that in writing. And Ted, our consulting planner, did advise last week that in addition to including all of the, this is quite literally, all of our standing board's comments in the DGEIS, that the boards send it directly to Nancy Stoner at New York State, so that she has it separate and apart as a standing comment. So, come on up.
Thanks for having me. For everyone's awareness, I'm Jesse St. Charles and chair of the planning board. Thank you to the board for also your support of extending the deadline. We would not have been able to do what we have done today without a little bit of extra time. There's a lot of stuff to go through. And if you'll indulge just a tiny bit of preamble before I actually relay our comments, just want to give everyone the context of kind of how we got to where we got to, and then I'll deliver the comments that we have. So first, just as a reminder, the planning board's function, we're here as really concerned with the details of plans and balancing the rights of developers and the interests of the village and the residents. Like, our purview is really not in what is legally allowed in a broad sense, but what is specifically within what is allowed, what is good for the village. So the process we went through here, because we can only discuss kind of the meat of what was in the DGIS for the Fjord Trail in session, we met twice in December, 4 times in January, and we'll have met 4 times in February. We made our way through the mass of 700 plus pages and the appendix to try to understand what was being presented and represent the village well there. And importantly, our comments are really limited to only what is in the DGIS. Like, everything that may or may not have happened in the years prior was not really considered because we are concerned with the details of what's being presented. So that's what we focused on. Tonight, I'm going to be presenting draft comments. We are planning on formally adopting them tomorrow. I've got 4 members here, one that couldn't make it, but I wanted to make sure that we made them available to you while we were still before the close of the comment period, in case it was useful to the board. Okay, so with that, I'll dive into our comments. All right. The Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail is a proposed recreational trail project that will significantly impact the village of Cold Spring. As it stands, the project draft generic environmental impact statement lacks sufficient consideration of the village interests and raises several concerns. HSFT has made significant unilateral assertions about the minimal or mitigated impact of the trail on village resources, including the scenic viewshed overlay district, emergency services, transportation capacity, parking, garbage, and utilization of existing parkland. This board holds that these assertions are either poorly supported or unsupported in the DGIS. Moreover, we believe, in accordance with the New York State Coastal Management Program, the planning board is the authority for validating such claims for the impact of proposed actions on these resources within the village boundaries. The New York State CMP document says explicitly, for at least parts of the project that impact the village of Cold Spring directly, full consideration should be given. Policy 18 states, to safeguard the vital economic, social, and environmental interests of the state and of its citizens, proposed major actions in the coastal area must give full consideration to those interests and to the safeguards which the state has established to protect valuable coastal areas. Policy 25 states, protect, restore, or enhance natural and man-made resources which are not identified as being of statewide significance, but which contribute to the overall scenic quality of the coastal area. To us, these policies suggest a requirement to respect Scenic Viewshed Overlay District, its inventory of scenic resources, and our planning authority over projects that impact them, especially given the substantial alteration to the waterfront that is presented in the DGEIS. With respect to the SVO, the dockside connector is missing many critical design details that would clarify its impact on the scenic viewshed. The on-platform trail specifications lack details on fence materials design and height at various points along its path. The description suggests a base platform at least 1 foot above railroad tracks and at least 12 feet of fencing, and substantial change in elevation at the northern end to meet Little Stony Point. The board believes that even without the design details, the bulk dimensions make it highly unlikely the SVO will not be substantially impacted by the overwater connector. Views of the river from large stretches of Fair Street and Mayor's Park will likely be fully obscured by the connector and its required fencing. The photos provided are either unhelpful or misleading. The photo from across the river is at an optimal vantage point, at an optimal vantage such that the connector sits within the visual envelope of the train tracks, something that will not be true for any other angle of view. The picture from Mayor's Park is both low granularity and appears to be missing rendering of the required fencing. The board suggests at least using the Fair Street Municipal Lot as a vantage point to measure visual impact. Broadly in the DGEIS, there seems to be a working assumption that any park-related infrastructure adds to the scenic quality of the land. The Planning Board believes this is not a given, and that reasonable people can decide park infrastructure can detract from the scenic quality of land depending on its design, location, and scale. The DGIS fails to recognize that Dockside Park, augmented with a large overwater boardwalk, dockside connector, will become a substantial attraction by itself. Dockside Park and the surrounding streets are already regularly at capacity. Trash overflows dockside trash cans every weekend in the spring, summer, and fall. Since Scenic Hudson currently relies on the village for trash pickup at Dockside Park, we would expect HHFT to include some offsetting measures to mitigate the burden of increased visitorship to this site. This could include taking over trash management entirely or heavily subsidizing the village trash removal services. Traffic is also too narrowly studied within the DGIS. Traffic dynamics were only studied at 2 intersections, Fair and Main and 9D, and only with respect to increased traffic to trailhead parking lots. However, given Dockside Park can reasonably be expected to draw many more tourists than it currently does, and lower Main streets are already considered to be capacity, it seems to be a significant oversight to not include Lower Main and surrounding streets in traffic analysis with Dockside Park and MTA parking lots as added destinations. Additionally, proposals for mitigating added traffic lack detail and require but don't acknowledge that the village must lose parking resources to resolve HHFT created traffic issues. Finally, the board found shuttle / bus plans to be too nebulous to seriously consider how they might impact flows of traffic and pedestrians. Construction noise is judged to be acceptable by HHFT, but the magnitude, frequency, and length of time of pile driving construction is likely to violate Cold Spring noise ordinances and generally be a long-lived nuisance to village residents, especially given how sound reverberates off the surrounding mountains and the number of years expected for construction. Heavy construction vehicles making 10 to 15 trips a day on village streets are likely to generate substantial wear. There's no mention of this or street repair assistance / financial compensation to offset the burden on the village. Impact on local emergency services seems dismissed out of hand. This is especially concerning as we receive public comment from the officer in charge of the Cold Spring Police Department that HHFT had not reached out to his department to discuss potential impact. In his view, the level of service Cold Spring residents receive from fire, police, and ambulance would be degraded by the additional demands placed on them by the scale of visitorship discussed within the GGIS. Dockside Park is a significant park resource within the village. Villagers use it for jogging, picnicking, watching movies, and other activities. These activities will be negatively impacted by using a substantial portion of the park as a staging area for this project. Finally, alternatives seem to be unnecessarily coupled, resulting in each alignment alternatives not being independently considered. This board is especially interested in a more thorough discussion of alternative 2 alignment 1, as it seems like it may lessen the project's impacts on the viewshed, while still avoiding using core parts of the village for transporting HHFT tourists. The planning board urges the HHFT to address these concerns and provide more detailed information before proceeding with the project. The current DGEIS does not provide sufficient evidence to determine whether the HHFT will be a net benefit or detriment to the village of Cold Spring. The planning board is committed to working with HHFT to ensure the project is developed in a way that respects the village's unique character and protects the interests of its residents. We have many developers that come before our board in good faith and good effort that still need to alter plans when working toward a final proposal. This is not because the motivations or the initial ideas are bad, but simply because, in the best of circumstances, empathy cannot replace advocacy. It is because of this we urge that any official that supports the broad strokes of the Fjord Trail South recognize the importance of continued oversight from this board. Taken all together, it appears that HHFT has taken a cursory check-the-box approach with Cold Spring, one that results in poorly supported and incorrect conclusions about the project's impact on the village. Relying on the empathy or good intentions of developers has never been a part of the state's approach to planning. The state deems planning boards essential because they bring local advocacy with consequence to counter the limited viewpoint of a single developer. We ask that serious consideration be given to this board's comments and to utilize its planning authority to shape and approve parts of the project that exist within the village boundaries. To those in Cold Spring who look to other public works projects for inspiration and reassurance on what could be here, this board humbly asks that they not confuse the outputs for inputs. Many of us, including those on this board, have experienced firsthand what large waterfront park projects can offer a community. But those projects were almost certainly substantially shaped by planning processes that ensured a partnership between the developer and local interests. That's not what we have here. One may feel that that's acceptable and trust HHFT to make unilateral decisions that are good for Cold Spring. But in this board's experience, and especially given the concerns we've outlined above, that is a very risky proposition and may have severe and permanent consequences for Cold Spring and its residents. In good faith, Cold Spring Planning Board.
Any questions for Jesse?
I have a couple of questions. First of all, thanks, Jesse, and thanks to all of the volunteers on the planning board. I appreciate the incredible amount of time that you put into this specific work, but the work in general as being on the board. So you have our thanks for that. There's one question here. I just was not clear about a sentence. This is not because the motivations or initial idea. I'm reading from the copy that you sent us 12 days ago, which I think was the same as what you're reading now.
There's some mild typos, but yeah.
Okay. Okay, good. Well, thank you for sending that 12 days ago. This is not because the motivations or initial ideas are bad, but simply because even in the best of circumstances, empathy cannot replace advocacy. That just confused me. I'm not sure who's being empathetic and who's advocating. Can you explain that a little bit better?
Yeah. I guess I'm trying to explain that. Let's imagine every developer that comes before the planning board is a kind, empathetic, like thinking like, oh, how can I develop this project in a way that's super sensitive to the village? And we do have developers that are like that sometimes. But even in those scenarios, there is only so much a developer can do to adopt the posture, to understand what the village's interests are and what the impacts might be, which is why the board exists. The board exists to say, okay, cool. We really appreciate all the hard work and thought and empathy you brought to this process and to your project. Here are some additional things that we as advocates are going to bring to this conversation that maybe you just didn't think about. Not because you had any bad intent, but because that's not your job. Your job is to think about how to develop the project effectively, right? And our job as the planning board is to advocate for the village. So that's the distinction I was trying to draw. Basically saying, look, everyone can be operating in really good faith and really trying to do a good job for what they think is gonna bring value to the region or to the village. And there can still be a lot of value in having that counterbalance from the village, from the planning board, only because our role is to advocate for the village and only advocate for the village.
Okay, thank you. I understand that a lot better. And just one other small thing. Your last paragraph is addressed to those in Cold Spring.
Yeah.
But this document should be addressed to, I believe that the use is to the project planners, right? So it's your document, your committee's document, your choice. So you're welcome to do that as you want to. It just might detract a little bit from some of the other statements because it sounds like a political statement when you add that. But which might be what you want to do. I'm not sure. But as a response to the DGEIS, and we're all guilty of the same thing, having a direct the sort of direct response that you have, the rest of it seems to be more effective. So thanks.
Thanks for that feedback. I think the intent of the last paragraph was really not intended to be political, but we actually got a lot of the ways in which a lot of the broad strokes of support, I think, echo a lot of the board members' experience with really successful waterfront projects that they have experienced in their lifetime. I grew up in a southern city whose downtown was revitalized by a multi-mile waterfront development project that it did wonders for the city. And I think that, like, what I saw, what the board saw from those comments was really wanting to redirect everybody, both the state, the developer, and the public's attention back to the structural value of the planning process and what we can bring. So that was the intent of it. Certainly not my intent for it to come off as political. So
yeah, thank you. The only last comment, and this might be more towards for the mayor, but this document does reference public comments from the officer in charge, and I think 2 or 3 weeks ago we spoke about receiving those by email. I haven't received those yet. I wonder if there might be a way for us to get those public comments from the officer in charge, please.
The officer in charge actually attended their meeting.
it's
yes.
on YouTube if you would like to find it.
Verbal comments.
His verbal comments,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, I believe at the following board meeting, he said he would email the comments, but
They're in an email. They need to be put on letterhead and inclusion, just like mine do and yours do, and Laura's does. We're all compiling our last comments. So Officer
Okay.
Jackson is here if he would like to address that question. He's online. Do you have a microphone tonight, Matt?
I'm very happy to wait until the comments are finalized and read them then.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sure that they will be to you when the whole package is put together. They'll be with you.
Great.
And one, are you set, Aaron?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, actually, Matt has just unmuted himself. Sorry. Give me.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out this phone here. Yeah, I could send you the write-up that I have. I thought that I forwarded it to the board. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I can send it again. It's not a problem.
Thank you.
I only have
Whenever,
it in email format, Matt. We need to get it on your letterhead.
Okay, I'll double check it. I thought that it was, but I'll double check.
Okay, sounds good.
Yes,
All
we
right.
At the last point you were revising, there was a mention about fencing that you wanted to revise. So perhaps that's what.
Say that one more time. I
You said
didn't
that you
quite.
wanted to modify a section about fencing.
Oh, about the
So I
fencing.
understood you to still be modifying it.
Yeah. I'll read it over one more time and then
Okay.
but in the meantime, if you want to see it, nothing's going to change other than a couple of wordings that I thought about afterwards. So you could take a look at it now. It's either way, it's the same thing.
Sounds great. Thanks, Laura.
Well, thank you to you and the board. You met something like 10 times, which is really remarkable, and thank you. And I appreciate the reminder of the overall role and importance of a planning board in municipality. This is just more a technical technicality question. There's discussion about the Dockside Park and the trash. My understanding is that the state or HHFT would take over the management of it so that we will have lots of trash concerns in the village, as we, always do in tourist season, but I don't think it's something that within the park is a concern. So maybe you meant sort of in the area around, along the waterfront and areas outside of Dockside Park, but
Yes.
just to make,
Yeah, I can try to make that distinction. So I guess it probably would be helpful to describe where I know that like the tract of parkland that's there is including what goes on the other side of the train tracks for the Foundry Loop are managed by HHFT. Sorry, our City Hudson, sorry. Yeah, exactly. Sorry. The kind of the relation, the actual like management and financial relationships between all of those are a little opaque to us. So if you happen to have any guidance about where those relationships go and where the funding goes, I think that would be helpful to us for sure.
If only we had, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so at this point, just to clarify for everyone, the boat club, the dock and waterfront park are village parks. Dockside is a New York State park. It is managed by the village under a 2018 contractual agreement, which expires in 2028. So currently what happens with trash there is that it's a carry in, carry out, mostly taken to the entrance, and then it's picked up as part of our regular garbage collection. As I understand the DGIS, there is a proposal for additional trash cans within the park and service pickup. It's been a bit misleading, these advertisements that have photos of overflowing trash cans and saying, what do you prefer, this or that? Those photographs are from outside the park. And what's offered in the DGIS is within the park, and if the dockside connector, only if the dockside connector is. That's the current position. Anything else for Jesse?
Can I just make a comment on that, since I'm on the board and that was part of my
Let's
proposal?
ask your chairman.
Yeah. Yes, okay, well, part of the trash as well is the overflow that's gonna happen within the village, the excess tourists that are gonna come in. So that's really more of the concern of us wanting to make sure that the village that we have some advocacy for them to help the village with the excess
Understood.
trash.
It's really important that you're clear
Clear
about that,
Right,
because right
exactly.
now you're not getting it
Yeah.
Right.
under the DGIS.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
So I have a comment or just some observations on your report, and thank you to your board, like on the inside, like for putting so much effort and attention to this. It's a lot to review, and it is really important. Overall, I'd say your report kind of expresses sort of a regret that the planning board doesn't have more power in the process, and a wish that you guys did have more review process power, which this is a state project. We all know that our planning board does not. So
I believe it is within the state's power to grant us targeted approval.
granted, so the request, I hear that,
Yeah.
and I agree that I think partnership would be helpful, and more participation, of feeling like we're working together to solve these last points, and the planning board could be very helpful in that. So that's what's heard in your report, and I think that's a good point. However, I also think that overall the report expresses that the views and the opinions and the concerns that the Fjord Trail will negatively impact the village, but it but it fails to acknowledge the views that it will benefit our residents. You know, things like the view shed, like, okay, so there might be a fence from the land, but now villagers get to enjoy views from the park that we never had access to before. So I find, you know, overall with this report from your board that there's a lot of negative projections or negative fears being expressed,
Yeah.
but it's not also acknowledging that there are plenty of villagers who feel that there are some positives that we have to gain from this project.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're gonna speculate in one direction, you should represent everyone and speculate both ways, or leave speculation out entirely, which, you know, that's my preferred method, but,
It's a good call out, and I think the board discussed a lot of the positives that you talked about
but
there.
it's not in your report.
You're right, it's not in here, and I think that that's something we can talk about tomorrow, about layering back in some aspects of the things we talked about. I think in a lot of ways, the things that were top of mind for us were, you know, like how many good feelings does it take to counterbalance a bad feeling? It's like 5. So I think that like it was you know, kind of where our attention was being driven was just concerns about the risks that were there for the village. But I agree. I think that, like, you know, having access to a park resource, a well-designed and implemented park resource is generally a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that, you know, the visitors will benefit and are beneficiaries, but you failed to mention completely that our residents are absolute beneficiaries of this park. So I would love a little bit of measured balance there. And I think that both are valid. I think the concerns and fears and speculations, you know, they could happen and the positives could happen too. But if you're going to pick one, you should balance it with the other, because there are plenty of villagers who feel both, or one or the other, but it would better represent our community to represent both.
Just for clarification, the planning board is a quasi judicial board that held its own public hearings. They are not representative. We are. Their job is not to represent.
Yes, I'm
Public,
aware of this.
I'm stating this for the public. I haven't interrupted you. I'd ask you not to interrupt me. The planning board is a quasi judicial board, not a representative board. Their determinations and their reports and their findings are at their discretion, and their discretion is based upon the facts of an application before them. So we can talk about representation up here. The planning board chooses how it makes its comments. Anything else, Jesse?
I guess maybe a thing that I want to clarify there on the like speculation part. I think that we're trying not to speculate about what we're trying to quantify risk based on what's described or not described, right? And so in terms of speculating about bad outcomes, I think it's really about trying to describe, given an implementation that's currently described in the detail that it's described, that there is a risk there that we want to better, we either want more explicit remediation measures taken. We're not trying to like imagine a bunch of worst case. We're trying to construct a structured understanding of potential impacts of a particular plan so that we can then have a conversation. I mean, the idea in a normal circumstance, we would have a conversation with a developer, say, hey, like, here's some things we're really worried about, like traffic going to Lower Main. Doesn't seem like you've addressed that. Like, talk to us about why you chose to do that. And like, why should we not worry about it? And they may have a great answer. And we say, cool, thank you for that. But I think we're really just trying to draw bounds around the variability we see and therefore the risk we see for the village as the plan is kind of laid out right now. So I know that helps with
I trust
No.
your board to make a good decision.
Yeah, and we do appreciate the odd situation this is, because there is no application in front of the planning board, right? Normally, as you say, you would have a conversation And that's not the setup here to have a conversation. So you have to have a conversation with an imaginary developer based on this preparation that wasn't designed for the
Yeah.
planning board, right? So it is a very unusual situation here.
And thank you, Jesse. I also want to note that when all of this package is put together, planning board's comment will be part of it. The HDRB has also commented, not inconsistent with the planning board's comments, and the zoning board, not inconsistent. So they'll all be available for public comment, not for public comment, but for public view as the DGIS response packet for the village. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Now we have our response to discuss. So like the planning board, we are screening into the end of the deadline as everyone else is. And we're not going to be ready to make a decision tonight. We need to discuss. We had, just to tell you where we've been to date, we've hired a consulting planner and a consulting traffic engineer. They have both provided draft responses. Ted Fink, I think, is with us tonight. Our planner, the village attorney is with us, or he was.
First,
First, I think. Regardless, we discussed it in draft form last week, and there was some really good feedback about length, repetition, and the way ideas were laid out in different sections in a way that felt repetitive. So I took a crack at reformatting it while Ted was continuing to write his note by note specific document that we have yet to see. The status of that, Ted?
I am about, last time I spoke with you, I was about 70% through. Now I'm about 90 to 95% through. So I should have it finished by tomorrow morning.
So that will be under item E, peer review. Tonight we've got right before the meeting, we got the traffic engineers draft comments. So none of us have been able to absorb all of these things, and we're not going to be able to have a super deep discussion about any of it tonight. But I wanted to talk through, I did last night send out to you before I pared down, I sent out the revised format. I got feedback from Aaron that was really helpful. And there are some things that I went ahead and did, and then there's some things that I think we need to talk about. But response from others about the general approach in this revised construction. Any
I mean, I'll say, I think, the sort of reworking of the, duplicitous comments in various sections.
duplicative. Let's adjust that in the public record.
Sorry, my bad, I strike that, the duplicative, comments was helpful because reading it, it was getting a little bit gobbledygook. So I think those edits were really good. I think Aaron's suggestions were also very helpful. I agree. I think, I don't know, I know we got another document around 6, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
from the
so,
traffic engineer.
yeah.
And the
yeah.
edited one.
So I don't feel like, I feel like I need to
Well, we all do.
start again, right, and reread. I'm not in a place to make major comments, but I do think the outline that you have proposed now is definitely will be helpful for us and helpful for the community.
And after going through and pulling out, so the process was thank you. That makes the room much more comfortable, unfortunately. It is a volume problem. So after the structure, I dumped Ted's comments into those new buckets. And then where there was repetition took out, it got us down to it got us down to 31 pages. So we've come down substantially from where we were, and I think it's a lot tighter.
I would just say, I appreciate all of the work. In my mind, these kinds of environmental review processes are often long because they are aiming to be very comprehensive and to follow a certain format. And so I don't want us to lose content in order for brevity. I don't think that there's a need for that. You know, the purpose is to provide our full, full comment. So if there are places where it's duplicative, that's fine, but I don't think that we need to cut for, yeah, I think we want to
Yeah,
make sure.
I don't feel that that was done.
Yeah.
But when you read it, if you think that anything is missing in the shortening, don't be afraid to, pipe in. For me, I found some of it, like I was confused about which section I was reading because I was reading the same thing over again. Okay. So let's see, Erin, I'm working from your email. I have put in the item numbers on the findings throughout the document. That's there. Community
I think-
character, go ahead.
The top half of my comments were simply editorial, so you can take them or leave them as you wish. It's just really trying to be for clarity. The bottom half, I think, is more ideas
That's the more
for
substantive.
discussion, right? Which I'm happy to introduce those. So,
I'm sorry, I still have the floor though. I'm thank you for the clarification. John Canning, you asked about John Canning's. They are here. You should have them by email tonight, and we all need to read them. This section, you note that the sections on community character are weaker than the other arguments, and I think it's worthwhile, while we have Ted tonight, for him to talk to us again about what character means in the context of seeker and why it is such an important argument.
would it help if I explain my comment more?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the reasons, obviously it will be further edited, but we do spend many, many pages on community character right now in the document. And it's clearly and self-evidently a very important facet to look at and to strengthen. And I think I agree that community character was not well addressed in the DGEIS. So that's an important thing for us to call out. But our response goes quite a bit further. And I think there's a couple of issues that, in my opinion, we miss there. For starters, we emphasize very much that in the comprehensive plan and in other documents that preservation of community character is the goal number one. But I am not aware of any of those documents that state that the goals as listed are in priority order. They are listed in numerical order, but perhaps all of the goals are equally important. And the goals are often contradictory, which is, I think, a normal thing for our sort of organization. We have different goals. There's tension between them. That's healthy. That allows things to be dynamic and move forward. But we ourselves in this document criticize the DGEIS for focusing only on the Riverwalk goal and not on any others. And I think we are making a similar mistake by focusing only on the community character goal and not looking at the other goals in these documents. And I don't want us to be so narrow focused on that. I also think, and this I elaborate in my comments, which unfortunately I wasn't able to send before the meeting, but we have a lot to read anyway, so I will send that shortly. That the and then I think there was improvements recently in this. There's no sense of like Cold Spring's not an amber. We're not preserved in that way. And in fact, in the last 5 or 10 years, there's been a tremendous revitalization of the waterfront, of the West Point Foundry Preserve, Dockside Park has been improved. And this is all by public and private groups doing all of this. And I think all Cold Springers are really proud of this revitalization that's happened. And that to me is an important part of our character today, is investment and improvement in various different places. Now that seems to come from just recent history, and maybe there's not documentary evidence, but it does seem to be something that for me weighs very heavily on my view of this project. But we don't talk about those things at all, right? We only talk about the idea of preservation. But really what we've been doing is improving, not just preserving. And I think that's what an important thing is for us. And by that lens, there's a different point of view that we can have on this project that we don't look at. But the other,
Aaron,
yes,
before we move on, can I
please
comment on that? I actually think that's a great idea to include that. I did add some portion in there about Cold Spring being a living village, ever changing, et cetera. So some of that feedback from last week, you haven't had a chance to get there yet, obviously, but some of that was addressed.
I did see that, and I appreciate that.
But I think that you're making a good point. And I think that the key in that is when those improvements and investments were made, they were made, even the West Point Foundry was reviewed by the planning board and reviewed by the HDRB. They were reviewed through the lens of local land use laws, and they became better projects because of it. I think you're right that it's worth doing that and talking about how, we are not a museum, we are a living village, but in order for things to change and maintain character, we need to make sure that that modification is done within parameters that do preserve the character. Something can be different, you're thinking about it from a built environment perspective. I think a lot about the Meyer House on Kemble Avenue, that's across from the Marathon site. It is very much of its time. It's within the historic district. It doesn't look like historic architecture, but it references surrounding historic architecture in its design, and it also references the mountainscape of Breakneck. So that was a very thoughtful, big change in the historic district, but thoughtful in a way that it now sits comfortably within the district and within the village, and takes us into a new period of time. And I think that's what we're getting at.
Well,
that kind of appropriate review.
It leads me to why I call this weaker and why this section weaker. Because you've illustrated really well where there are specific cases of wanting to do things and improving those projects to fit more of the community character. But I find that in the response as it is now, or as it is the last time I read it earlier today, there aren't too many specific cases where the proposed project would be in conflict with community character. And having specific cases where we state that it's not would make this stronger. Or perhaps examples of other projects that are like this. But otherwise, it just sounds like we're talking about a process, which is valid, but we haven't even been able to find cases why this process is a bad thing.
I just named one. I think what I'm saying is that I take your point. I think it's valid, and I think that references like that can be worked in. Part of the character is caring about the place and making good decisions, right? So, and the outcomes that we have are good when we've been thoughtful about them. So if there are particular places, if you want to email, I will think about places where I think that can fit in, but if others have suggestions for where that kind of reference that Erin is making would fit in nicely, that's great.
Can I add, I think we also need to remember that SECRA is a procedural act. And so what Ted is pointing to is that community character is one of the criteria that's evaluated in secra. And he's making the point that they use regional data and not the specifics of Cold Spring. So, I think we can like give this kind of, we are giving this commentary, but to some degree, in a, public comment on a secret document, like what they're interested in is, did you follow, his assessment is, did it follow the procedure that's set out? And so, I think that, that's one of the pieces that I think is important to maintain, and like, that's why, I can say more of this, but my sense is that that's why he framed it the way that he did, of looking at, the analysis of community character and what was lacking from that perspective.
Ted, you want to add?
No, I think Laura expressed it pretty well. That's exactly the point, was to remind the preparers of the DGIS of the obligations and of the full breadth of the seeker regulations when it comes to things like this. And that the comprehensive plan is really the only document that expresses what the vision is for the residents of Cold Spring. And it describes that community character in all its different facets within the village. And they missed that in the DGEIS, and it was a big oversight on their part. And the fact that Cold Spring is completely within the coastal zone, and there has been a local waterfront revitalization strategy that was accepted by the state of New York, that mirrors the comprehensive plan, contains the same policies as the comprehensive plan, but also goes beyond that and made even more concrete suggestions for the Riverwalk Loop, for instance. And that's going to be in my comments, that they completely ignored in their alternatives analysis. Didn't even look at it, didn't even present anything that's right within that. And yet in the seeker regulations, there is a provision that the local waterfront revitalization program does need to be considered, and they have to make explicit findings if the municipalities within the coastal zone and the action is within the coastal zone area.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Was our local waterfront revitalization plan like accepted, adopted? Is it, what?
So there's a whole explanation of that within the document, and Ted can speak to it as well, but it was drafted, and then but for two updates that were necessary, it paused. And that was the zoning code update and the HDRB update. The HDRB update in 2018, we finished the zoning code update. With great agony, we did it in 2023. In the meantime, so that the LWRS, the strategy, not the plan, could not become a plan yet, the LWRS, the sort of the hinge between that strategy and our existing land use laws, and sort of the placement for the protections that the LWRP could eventually offer, was the waterfront consistency chapter in our code. And Ted, I'm going to let you go from there with that and explain that better than I will.
The problem with explaining that is that I think the only people that have a good grip on exactly how that process works are the attorneys that are within the Department of State's Coastal Management Program. It is a convoluted process. I've attempted to find information on what happens when you're in this middle area where you have a strategy that's been accepted by the local municipality, it's been accepted by the Department of State, yet it doesn't have the full force that the local waterfront revitalization program would have. Because the next step, now that the HDRB and the zoning has been completed, would be to finalize the LWRP. And that document would then need to go through the Department of State's review process, which at the moment is running about 2 to 3 years in order to get an LWRP approved. And then once they approve it, it goes on to the federal government for their confirmation that federal agencies will be subject to the local waterfront revitalization program. That can take additional time. So you're several years off from actually having a local waterfront revitalization program. In the interim, you have a set of policies that have been adopted for the coastal area. You have a state agency that has that we accept your LWRS, but that doesn't mean that it has the full force of the consistency provisions that are built into New York state law and the Federal Coastal Zone Act. So it's not an easy one to really figure out exactly what the status is. And the conversation gets even more convoluted when you accept that this is not a law that says thou shalt not do this. This is a consistency assessment law that says that the federal agency and state agency actions have to be consistent with policies, some case, not necessarily nebulous policies, but policies that are open to interpretation. And so each one of the 43 or 44 coastal policies has multiple pages devoted to an explanation of the policy. It's not actually part of the policy, but an explanation as to what is the intent of that particular policy. So the program is quite fraught with a number of pitfalls, and there's no simple answer to that question.
But its foundational purpose is to protect our coastal waterways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it can do that. Yes.
John, first, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, yeah, so Ted's absolutely right. The one thing I'd say, so it sounds like you have a plan that you've completed everything on your end. You're just waiting for the Department of State to sign off on it and the federal government to sign off on it, correct?
Well, there are updates that need to happen.
Right. So, I mean, just like a village's comprehensive plan is not just one document, it can consist of many documents. So, you know, even though it hasn't been officially finished or finalized or whatever you want to call it, I mean, I still think it's something that needs to be referred to and looked at, because you can look at many different types of plans that kind of make up the village's intended community character.
Thank you. Hang on, I gotta look to see. Okay, so we've addressed the community character element. The other two questions were, Laura gave similar feedback to you about contractual monetary infusion. You're saying we're calling for both a reduction in the size of the trail and a contractual perpetual budgetary infusion. Actually, your comments are slightly different. Aaron, to help make sure that I understand, what I think you're asking about there is, how can we ask for budgetary infusions if we're asking that the way the trail comes into the village be modified?
Basically, yeah. It's like,
scale.
I keep thinking about the joke at the beginning of Annie Hall, which is, you know, the food was terrible in such small portions. And it just seems like it's two things that don't really make sense together. You know, are we saying we're going to be overwhelmed? Are we saying, you know, you should make the trail smaller and give us money? Or, I mean, it just seems a little awkward to have both things in there.
Well, I'll give you my view, and then other trustees can give you theirs. My feeling is that we are already in the village impacted by visitors to the Hudson Highlands Park Preserve. We already don't get budgetary infusions from New York State Parks to assist with what we have. So the weakness and the lone weight on the shoulders of the village taxpayer already exist. I don't think that those two things, the budgetary infusion and a modified plan for the trail, are separate and apart. I don't think it's an or, I think it's an and. I think that we both already need help and should be, there should be help coming to the village. And I think that the way the trail comes into the village the scale, the material, the pathway, the routes, all of those things need to be done at a scale that works for those of us living in the village. So for me, it's not contradictory at all. Others?
I kind of agree with Aaron. I think that it's like I find this issue often in the village commentary is like, we want our cake and eat it too. We kind of want all the things our way without sort of a trade-off. We want the benefits, but never the negative, which everyone wants that, right? But I think, asking HHFT to pay for the problems we have now is kind of, this is not their problem. It's our problem. The state should be helping us. The county should be helping us. Our sales tax should be coming back and helping us cover the cost of visitation. And we've put in parking planning to help fund the cost of visitation management. And that's the kind of thing that we can do to cover these costs, and we're doing it. So I think, but I think Aaron had mentioned maybe at the last draft that the first year that the park begins, like, wasn't considered in the DGIS.
You mean the surge year?
Yeah, the surge year. And I think that it's not unreasonable to ask for some kind of support stipend for tourism management for the village in this period when it's kind of like, it might go crazy. There's a ballooning effect that may happen for a year or two. And that seems reasonable. I don't think that's related to the scale of it, because I think the thing is, and maybe that's what you were saying, is like, they're not really related. I just think that little surge year we need support there, because it is, I think it's not unreasonable to assume that there will be a little bit of a surge then, and they saw that up in the walk across Hudson.
Walkway over the Hudson.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, like, I'd like to sort of separate some of these things, because I feel like when we talk about them, we smash them all together, and like, they're like separate buckets.
I don't see them that way at all. I think, yes, we're going to need additional help in the support year, but right now, the way the DGIS is structured, you're talking about having your cake and eating it too. Right now, the way this document is structured, we are being held hostage. And we are being told that you will get mitigation if you say yes to the trail coming at full scale into Dockside. Right? And there's a graph in the master plan that shows what you get if you say yes to Dockside and what you get if you say no. Not that we can say that ourselves, but illustrating that bathrooms, garbage pickup, those things happen if we say yes to Dockside, and they happen within the park. That is a very different proposition than the trail that was originally envisioned by this community in 2007, and the support that was intended to be by the founders of that project was intended to be given to the village itself. It's a very different thing. And so having your cake and eating it too is one way to look at it. I see it as being held hostage, and I do think that we have to talk about funding and offsets in perpetuity, because this trail is not being built for 3 years, it's being built forever. I mean, the DGIS makes reference to a 50-year lifespan, but it's being built forever, and it will always have impact on the village. We're going to be living side by side and hopefully in synergy always.
Again, from like an EIS process side, I work in government, so like it's just like the way I'm gonna think about it. Right, Erin, you were saying, there's a request to reduce the length of it or the location but then also asking for funding. Those are different alternatives and they have different impacts that need to be analyzed with mitigation measures proposed. And so, I think that what's implicit in here is that there are different scenarios that are being asked for and asked for them to be evaluated with measures proposed to address impacts. So, and that's maybe like the sort of formal way to think about funding or other support for the village. I think it's also very common in these kinds of processes that there's a something in addition to the kind of formal impact mitigation that is a kind of a
An agreement.
that comes with it. The point that I made to the mayor before that was in an earlier version was that it was called a community benefits agreement, and I don't feel comfortable calling it that. I think that means a particular thing in particular cases, and that's not what we mean. But I think I am fine with including the concept of funding to address impacts outside of the park to the village and to address kind of fiscal impacts.
So that section now starts on page 25, and I did pull out that specific language because that seemed nebulous and perhaps inapplicable to me as well, but some sort of other agreement. The language that is used now is, well, first of all, this is part of the impact mitigation is an endowment sufficient to support the operations and maintenance of the fjord trail should HHFT fail to do so. So that needs to be fleshed out and talked about more. And I'm trying to find, I think I said perpetual. In the same way that we think about other developers and the planning board will have reference to this, if we were talking about a private development, we would have leverage in terms of payment in lieu of taxes, performance bonds, and those kinds of things I think need to be available to the village, and we do need to think about ongoing infusions, budgetary infusions. Erin, have we addressed that question that you had? Or that point?
I mostly want to just call it out and have the discussion, so I think that was done.
Okay.
And there
then
was
the last was about alternative phasing for the project. I did create a conclusion section. Starts on page 30. And I did lay out a proposal for redefining phasing, extending the period of review for that first phase to allow for analysis of the surge years versus normal use. And to be able to observe and document the real and actual impacts and data on the ground as opposed to speculation and projection. Concurrently requesting concurrent implementation of mitigation impacts and feeder trails. If we build north of the village first, and there aren't what we originally talked about in the village in terms of improvements for pathways out of the village to the trailheads, it's doomed to fail, right? So build north, show us that your mitigation impacts or your mitigation measures are working north with our feeder trails. And then we decide if we bring the trail at full scale in. This is the proposal I'm putting before the board. And then during that period of time, de-emphasizing the village of Cold Spring as an arrival point for trailheads, emphasizing the new, very expensive, very beautiful train station that's going to be built at the trailheads. If you're going to the trailheads, you can get off right at the trailheads. You don't need to get off in the village. I think there's the idea that the village is going to die without the fjord trail. We have plenty of people who come to the village just for the village. In fact, we have more than we can handle already. And so the idea that the village is central, and I think that there has been, frankly, a sort of disingenuous representation of the chamber and businesses and merchants on Main Street as all having a single view and all being in support of the Fjord Trail. The reality is they are not a monolith. And there are alternate views. There are alternate views that say, it's too many people. I have so many people in my shop right now, it's hard for me to be open. I'm dealing with shoplifting. There are too many people. But also resident relevant businesses like the flower shop, and Bo has spoken very clearly in public, that her resident relevant business suffers at peak season because residents can't get to her. So it isn't simple. There isn't one answer. And we need to be having all of these things, all of these mechanisms working together. And so that is my
Right.
reason for, I'm not finished yet, Aaron, and I'm happy to turn over the floor to you when I'm finished. That is why I think a de-emphasis on the Cold Spring train station and a larger emphasis on the northern train station is important. And then the last is creating metrics and substantive public comment after the pause. Ted, you would need to look at this and see if I'm using the right language, but my suggestion was requiring a supplemental environmental impact statement for the shoreline trail south. And naming the Village of Cold Spring as an involved agency because of the non-parks properties in that area. And I thought, Ted, something that you wrote falls really nicely into a conclusion that if the Fjord Trail is planned so that Cold Spring's existing character is respected, then it will be enjoyed again and again by the thousands of residents and trail users who benefit from it. And I think ultimately that's what we're all trying for here. So I throw that out in terms of the phasing proposal. Aaron, you had a comment?
Yeah, thanks. The thing about the phasing of the trail as proposed is scheduled, if I understand the schedule right, to open in Cold Spring at Dockside at 2031, which is kind of a long time from now. And with this process, and it might even be delayed more than that. By my count, the phasing that you're proposing, Kathleen, in the document might delay it for another 10 years. And the part in Cold Spring, so 2041 or so. I mean, I'm 53 now, I'll be 70 when it opens, so better damn well be an ADA accessible trail at that point. It just seems like through the lens that we are being held hostage, or through the lens that we are going to suffer, or this is a really horrible thing, then delaying seems like a really good idea. But our analysis has been pointed out does mention in a few places that this will be a benefit, and that's an addition since the first draft, and I appreciate that. But I really do believe, and I am not at all alone, that there are amazing benefits to this, and I don't want to keep them from the residents for an extra 10 years, assuming we can go through the process the right way, have the right feedback, improve the plan from where it is now. I think there is a huge benefit to us, to the residents, to our future residents, to our housing values, to having a great trail starting in Cold Spring. So I think it really starts from where you begin and your point of view. Is it better to keep this scary thing away for as long as possible? Or is it better to say, this is going to be great, let's make it as good as we can, and let's have access to it?
I guess my response to that would be trust but verify. So there are a couple of things to consider here. First of all, in my view, and having talked with lots of different folks from across fields, architecture, engineering, construction. I think that the timing that's in the DGIS is already a fantasy. I haven't even gone to bid for the Breakneck Connector. That's a year behind, and they're not yet out to bid. There are still many private properties that need easements or acquisitions. That's going to take time. So I think the idea that has been promulgated that once we get through the DGIS, construction starts, is not helpful. It's not true. And it's not going to happen that way. So whether it's our phasing or their phasing, it's not happening immediately. And I don't see how it is unreasonable to say, build north and show us that your mitigation measures are working, then make a determination to come south. I don't see what we lose in that. We're not going to get the trail faster, right? We're still asking for meanders and improved pathways to the trailheads. Our access to the park and to the trails doesn't get worse. You're right, we don't get a trail on the river, but we also don't get a trail on the river, which means we can make sure that we're making a really good decision about that. Others?
I would say, I don't support your proposal, Mayor. And it's because, like, I said before, and Aaron mentioned it, this sort of taking the position of, this is gonna be a bad thing, rather than people are really excited about this. Like, they're both opinions exist. I don't know which one is true because it hasn't happened yet. And I do feel like we should be representing everyone's views and not just the naysayers, the fearful, people who think this is the end of the world. And I think that suggesting the rephasing as you propose it will, like, the plan with Dockside connecting to Little Stony Point helps alleviate our traffic issues by spreading it in different paths for pedestrian traffic through the village. And pedestrian traffic through the village to the trails is, I think, the biggest issue. Having people not go all the way down, everyone funneling down Fair Street, but having them disperse. And so I think that by, extending the phasing, making it all north of the village first, and then waiting and seeing is kind of like compounding the issue, like artificially creating making the problem worse in a way. And so I don't think that's the right direction for us to take.
It's interesting that you should point out pedestrian traffic. There are two things I note in the DGEIS. The discussion of Dockside and an entrance at Dockside focuses on the train arrivals and not on the car arrivals. There is no discussion of people now turning down Main Street and wanting to drive to the entrance. People like to park at the cash register. And if we have an entrance at Dockside, we're going to have people driving, no matter how much you want them to come by train. We know that 65% of arrivals come by car from the south. So that's a concern to me that I don't believe has been explored or appropriately addressed in terms of mitigation in the DGIS. And again, what we're talking about here is not what you like and don't like, what your opinion is. What we're talking about is the seeker process and whether those impacts are mitigated in this proposal. Cars or not, cars going to Dockside or not. The other thing that I find fascinating is that the discussion of getting folks off Fair Street, the next logical discussion doesn't happen, which is, what about the people who live in the west part of the village? And what about the impacts on that residential neighborhood? So we are privileging one neighborhood in the discussion and ignoring another neighborhood from a mitigation standpoint. I'm not talking about opinion. I'm not talking about who you like. You know, this job in this DJS is not about opinion. It's not about being popular, and it's not about the popular view. It's about doing our job to make sure that mitigation impacts are in place. And I don't see those two in particular in the DGIS.
I would disagree with that, because suggesting that you're privileging the Fair Street residents over the west of the tracks residents doesn't make sense to me, because right now, the west of the tracks residents are privileged not to have people walking to Little Stony Point and the trails. And the Fair Street residents are dealing with the brunt of it, and by adding a second entrance at Dockside, you have now two flows of traffic, which will be less than any one being funneled. So I just disagree with
For
that.
pedestrians, not for cars. Did you have something to
Yeah,
say?
I have a question. Is there a compromise in this? I mean, these positions are pretty stark. It's either like Aaron in a wheelchair in 20 years or
Or hostage, or we're held hostage.
well, or, I mean, I guess I just wonder, you know, there are, I do approve and appreciate the idea of like a phased approach. I think there is a lot that can be learned from that, but I also feel like there is value in figuring out how, after we get everything that we need in a mitigation plan for the village, to figure out a way that this can happen not in 20 years, but in 10. Now, granted, there's a lot of that has nothing to do with anything that we talk about here, right? Funding, construction, materials, you name it. Buying, purchasing of properties that are not owned by the state. I mean, there are all sorts of other obstacles that we have nothing to do with. But that said, I mean, I feel like I've been silent on this particular topic because I just kind of wanted to understand it more. And as I've now had the privilege and honor of reading this document and hearing everyone's comments, regardless of whether I want to hear them or not, I do feel like there has to be somewhere in between this. I don't know what the answer is, but I feel like it feels extreme. So there's somewhere that we need to meet, and I don't know how to get there, but I do think that's.
The challenge is that unless you phase, right, then you make a commitment. Like there's no halfway point for building in the river between Dockside and Stony Point. That's it. There's no going back. There's no second chance. And to me,
True.
That's why phasing it in that particular way is so very important, because it is such an important decision.
But how much then additional time in research and analysis would be needed?
So what I'm suggesting, and acknowledging all of the realities that you've just raised, plus the fact that, right, MTA, Metro North has to get on board, the Army Corps has to get on board, the EPA, if there's any EPA left next week, they have to get on board. Right, there are multiple agencies that need to get on board. That's going to be a timeline. I don't know what that timeline is going to be, and it's not for me to actually worry about that timeline. You know, it is my job to worry about the timeline within the jurisdiction of this village, and it's all of our jobs to worry about that. And that is why I am frankly laser focused on the establishment of a phase that says Little Stony Point North with feeder trails. Laura?
I don't know how much I help you tweets on a compromise. I have really substantial unanswered questions and reservations about like governance, management, budget, for the entire trail. And so, it makes me have to think really hard, and I don't know where I stand, totally frankly, on, agreeing to a phasing, because that suggests that I have support for something where I don't, where I have like questions about the larger project. And, so I don't know, you know, I've been thinking about it a lot. You know, I understand from the kind of narrow village board. You know, I can kind of like see the phasing. I understand your rationale. So, but I also think like, you know, something like the de-emphasizing the village of Cold Spring, maybe it was Ted or someone else had said, that's the first thing that, like those kinds of commitments are very hard to enforce when something is in operation.
Right.
You know, a couple years down the line, who remembers what it, you know, there's a paragraph in a 1,500 page document that said that they would, you know, there's a new comms person and they start to this great new project. So I think that like that sort of commitment is something that I don't put a lot of weight on something like that. But I do, I mean, I guess I would be interested to understand this better, kind of a technical perspective from Ted, the idea of having a more detailed analysis of the kind of Pure Trail South piece. It was helpful for me to understand last week the difference between a generic EIS and a site-specific EIS. I remember, like, once you said that, I remembered back to early presentations where they said, oh, and there will be a, for the Cold Spring portion, there will be a site-specific EIS. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And, so, you know, I'm really interested in this idea of calling for a more detailed analysis here.
And that's certainly your prerogative. And as I said in the meeting last week too, they kind of mix things up because they do talk about some site-specific things in a very granular way. You know, they've come up with calculations of cut and fill volumes, which you don't see in a generic EIS. That's not the kind of thing where you're talking about concepts of a design that has yet to be engineered. And so, you know, that kind of stuff, I think it's already there. And the worst that can happen is they say no in the final EIS and they don't consider it. If you don't ask, they're not going to look at it further. But if you do, as an involved agency that has a responsibility to make a written finding on this, that will control whether or not you, you know, you decide as a village board to go forward with the improvements that are necessary and require village board approval. You know, that's a fairly significant role that the planning board, or I'm sorry, that the village board plays in this process. So they're going to, I think, look much more carefully at the sort of comments that you have, simply because, you know, it does have a role in the way that they have proposed it for the village board to be taking action. And the village board's finding statement on this can differ from the Office of Parks and Recreation finding statement on this. Every agency is responsible for their own finding. The findings for the Village of Cold Spring have to be based upon the assessment that's made in the DGEIS. So a failure to ask questions like that are not going to be in your favor. You want to get these things on the record so that at the end of the day, if there is a determination made by the village board that you want to prepare a finding to deny any sort of village approval of any of the aspects of the project within Cold Spring, they have to pay notice to that. So it's a fairly powerful little tool that you have.
One of the things, just for public awareness, that we have commented about in the response, it's not about opinion at all, it's just fact, that the scoping document from 2017 identified the village as having land use approvals, including site plan approval. That was slashed in the DGIS, and then we now our authority is our authority that's been prescribed to us is potential approval of possible sidewalks. That is an enormous, like, giant chasm. And I think that an explanation for that is real. I mean, maybe it's because, right, in the air, we're hearing legitimate concerns and questions being asked. And so the more you tighten down, the less you have to hear. But we, as a community, there are plenty of locations that are impacted by this project that are not within state parks properties, including our own streets, our own sidewalks, our own neighborhoods. And I don't think I think A, we have to be mindful of that, and B, I don't have a B. If someone else wants to propose, that is the compromise that I see as being most protective, and the request that I see as being most protective. It can be completely rejected. But if someone else, I wrote this, so I took Ted's, I wrote this last portion. But if someone else would like to do something different, somebody else has to do a draft. Come up with something else, because that's the best that I can see for protecting the village is asking for a pause and a site-specific environmental impact statement.
Tweeps, maybe be happy to chat, maybe the two of us, maybe we together we can come up with some ideas, because I do appreciate your point of view, and open to possible consensus and where we can be.
Let's talk about it. Because we have the comment period closes Tuesday at 5 p.m. Ted is not available this weekend, so he needs to get the package together and for us to read by Friday, and we need to schedule a session on Monday to vote to accept these comments and to submit them to New York State. So let's have the conversation. Now's the time.
I mean, I don't agree. I think we've done a lot of work on this document outside of public meeting, and something like this is
So I'm
much
telling
more
you that
helpful.
you have to turn around. I'm not telling you can't, Aaron. I'm telling you that you need to recognize what the deadlines are and what we're facing. And
Thank you.
that
I
all-
recognize what the deadline is. Thank you.
Excuse me. Recognize all that we're up against in terms of timeline and availability of our consulting planner. Is that right, Ted? You need to have everything packaged by what time Friday?
Well,
You
to have things
family
to have them in my hands and be able to turn them around does take some time. So, ideally sometime in the afternoon on Friday, not, 6 o'clock on Friday and then have to work till midnight again.
So Friday morning, basically,
Yeah.
would be.
That would be ideal.
Okay, so if you guys, now what this is gonna require is if it's something you don't want a discussion, I'm not sure why you don't want to have the discussion in public, because that seems to be something that you prefer. You've got to have that discussion and get something round to the board tomorrow.
I just want to be clear, of course, because I don't want your comment to be misunderstood. Discussions of the board should always be made in public, right? I mean, that's an obligation that we have under public meetings. But to trustees, sometimes it's easier to just chat together. And
You
to
can
be
do that.
fair,
I'm asking you if you
I'm
have
sorry,
time.
I have the floor,
I'm
I think
asking
is
you
the
if you have time.
phrase. Yes,
Yes, I'm asking you if you have time. You're away, right? You're in Ohio?
I will make time for this. This is very important, and I've been making time all along. Thank you.
I mean, yeah, I suppose so, but let's time out. My suggestion would be that we have this conversation now. I was trying to find a place. We all are in different stages of this. I'm trying to find a place of opportunity. It may be that there is, I don't know what are the articulation of another option to your option is. I guess I didn't understand it as having to have only one alternative in our response that Ted will take and craft and we give in. I guess I thought that there was potentially an opportunity to raise other voices in that concept.
I don't know what you mean.
So I guess what I'm saying is, hold on. The other thing is, like, I have not read what your
Right.
conclusions are in here. So in fairness, perhaps if we read it, we might come to a different understanding and be closer in our oneness, wholeness of voice. That said, I think it's also very clear that we're not one on this. So I was just putting it out there that perhaps there's something else that can be discussed. Between now and Friday morning, I don't know that I'm smart enough to come up with another phasing plan. I will say that I am not smart enough to come up with another phasing plan. So I feel like that missive or that, like, you know, shot is not exactly, it's a bit on putting on the spot. So,
John?
Can I just make a suggest? I mean, you guys don't have to come up with the alternatives. You just kind of need to identify the fact that more alternatives should be studied, including one,
that's why
whatever, two, you know, you don't have to like you certainly have to come up with the details, but I mean, the emphasis is that they take a hard look at alternatives. And
So
whether you like them or not at the end of the day doesn't matter. The whole point of this exercise, the whole point of these comments is to say, you need to take a hard look at this. You need to take a hard look at that. You need to take a better look and analysis of this. And you may be for the project or against the project. It really, in this framework, you should just be focused on what needs to be further studied. What are they missing? Not whether you like it or not. I think, you know, obviously from your position, you're a legislative body, so, you know, everyone has their own opinion about the project. But for purposes of these comments, you really got to make sure that you identify the portions of the DGIS that are lacking because they didn't take a hard look at certain things, and one of them could be alternatives. And you can propose one alternative that they should take a hard look at, and just note that, you know, there should be other alternatives that should be studied.
So maybe a way to this is to take out this section that's called conclusions and take the concepts that are contained therein and make sure they're dropped into the other topic categories. Like,
Well, and I think dropping them in, but without the, but with the should be analyzed.
Should be
frame
analyzed, yeah.
that maybe all of us could get, could agree with versus the, like, this is our preferred one.
Either that or expressing that there isn't a cohesive opinion on that from the board. Some board members say this, some board members express a different view, and allow for multiple opinions to be expressed in our comments so that everyone is represented.
and remember that all of our individual comments are part of this packet, and you should be submitting them directly to Nancy Stoner at Seeker. So all of our varying opinions are going to be represented. Where I think you and John have hit on something, and with your addition, is taking concepts that need further, not hashing, but need further questions that need to be addressed. And among those questions is, can it be phased differently? Can the meanders happen as part of that phasing, right? So framing it out from that kind of question asking perspective. Does that feel more comfortable as an extra on draft?
I feel like that provides more opportunity. I think
Yeah.
also what's wrong in asking the question is to note it.
Yeah.
Like, if we don't ask the questions now, we will not get the answers. And we will
Right.
not be on record asking the questions.
Right.
Yeah, I think you guys should be more focused like on the issue spotting, not necessarily, and it's their job to answer the questions and come to the, provide the data to answer your questions, but you really should be focused on spotting the issues and then have them explain why it's not an issue, or here's what we're gonna do to make sure it's not an issue.
Right. All right. So while you all are, we all have to read these, everything in the next 24 hours. My first task will be taking out that section and seeing where questions can be dropped in other parts that make more sense and get that around to you sooner rather than later as sort of a highlight. So your attention is drawn to it, so you know where they landed. We all need to read Canning's comments. What is the process with John Canning, Ted, for feedback?
Well, you can
He's sort of making his professional recommendations. It's not really a feedback.
yes, that's exactly what it is. His role in this is to be a peer review engineer that examines not necessarily the method in which they conducted their traffic impact assessment, but he's questioned some of the assumptions that were made and the judgment calls on the part of the DGEIS preparers. And he's raising questions that would typically be answered in the final generic environmental impact statement. This is a very normal part of the seeker review process where there is peer review involved. The seeker regulations actually have a whole section devoted to this and how the fees for the professionals that conduct peer review are actually handled by a lead agency and involved agencies. So he is raising questions just as you are about the sufficiency of the analysis that was done and whether or not they need to do any additional analysis. And so it's pretty straightforward on his part. Yeah.
And none of us are traffic engineers to provide substantive feedback anyway, right? We're reading his assessment of the DGEIS.
I think we need to perhaps vote to include or not include.
Say that again, Aaron?
I think perhaps we need to vote to include or not include his comments. Just as a package, right?
The whole package. We're not going to vote piece by piece.
Well, John Canning's comments specifically. I mean, unless we just assume.
Why would you hire a traffic engineer and pay him and not include his comments? I don't know.
I don't know if anybody on this board has read his comments yet, so I just
Not doing it tonight. What we're saying is read it, and when we come back together, if you can think of some reason to exclude them, I guess you can put it forward. I can't imagine why you would, but
that's all I'm saying.
okay. So all of the appendices and all of it, like Ted has a specific chapter by chapter assessment that we still need to read. So this, now we have this to read. Ted's gonna get us his section, you said tomorrow morning?
Yep.
So we all will have it in front of us. We all have a lot of reading to do between Thursday and Friday so that Ted can put it all together in a single package, which comes to us in our next session to vote to accept and forward. I don't see the utility in voting on individual sections. It's a package.
Can we just read it before we get into this?
No, of course, I'm not asking you to do it tonight. Yeah, I'm not asking you tonight. I'm telling you that's what we need to do before the next meeting is have read it all.
Right.
And the decision that in that session is we, as 5 members, accept or don't accept the assessment of our consulting planner and engineer, and our board's position represented as this document. And it may not be a unanimous vote. And it's not always, like in all of our work, it's not always a unanimous vote. Some people may vote no.
Should we talk schedule for Monday?
Yes. Is there court on Monday?
There is court on Monday evening.
At 6, right?
At 6,
But we would need to do like,
a daytime meeting or
after. And they start setting up in this room at,
not until after hours, so like probably 5:30.
so we could in theory do a 5 to 5:30.
The Hudson Highlands region is one of the most beautiful.
The train gets in at like 6:05.
They use the little room for,
Prosecutor.
prosecutor.
How long does?
I don't know what the
It
docket
depends
looks
on what's
like.
on the docket. We could do it, we could ask to do it at the firehouse.
You ask them to do it at the firehouse, good.
On Zoom, capacity at the firehouse.
Exactly.
Um,
I mean,
but it's open to the, could be open, it'll be open to the.
it'll be open to the public. Between now and Monday, I could probably try to figure out something with a laptop, a mobile webcam.
What time are we thinking about?
That's what we're
Like
trying to
this
settle on.
time?
Laura's saying she
So-
gets off the train at 6:05. When are you back? Or are you back?
I,
You don't know yet.
I have a business trip on Monday and I'm going to be available between 3 and 6. Pretty much. That's what time I have available.
And you'll be by Zoom, yeah?
Yes.
So we need an in-person forum. So if you and Laura needed to Zoom, you're in person, I'm in person, yeah? What capacity do you have between 3 and, you have to pick up your kid. What capacity do you have between 3 and 6?
I can meet at 4:30.
4:30? What did you say, Liza?
Well, then I'll just take a late train.
It's a late train.
Oh, yeah.
Or Josephine can get her.
Somebody.
Anybody.
Just take her.
Probably watching.
You don't want to be on Bertie's bad side, I assure you.
Does not offer compromises.
No, I'm well aware. 4:30 works for you, Aaron? Can 4:30 work for you?
Yes.
Okay, so in that case, we can do it here, because the court doesn't set up until 5:15 or something.
5:15, yeah.
So we need to post it.
Yep.
And anything else from John or Ted?
Nope.
Nothing else for me.
All right, see you all by email.
Thank you.
4:30.
Are we gonna take public comment?
Would you like to open for public comment?
I think we've had a lot of public comment on this subject and it's almost 9 o'clock and I would vote against it.
Others?
You know, always happy to hear from a limited time, so.
2 minutes?
Unfortunately, I do need to excuse myself, and put my father to bed, but,
Do
but
that's more important.
thank you all very much.
Okay, so I will make a motion to accept public comment. Do we have a timer?
Can we cut it off at 9?
For 2 minutes.
2 minutes
2 minutes.
and cut it off at 9.
I can't see what time it is.
It's 10 to 12 to.
2:47.
Is there anyone in the room first? Good night, thank you. Any village resident in the room first who'd like to make a comment? Go ahead. You got the timer going?
I got the timer going, just your.
So just, I'm interested in this, talk about offsets and hostage metaphors. So I think, someone's being hostage, there's normally a resolution to that, which is you pay a ransom. So, were it to happen were the trail to come to the village, which I wouldn't be in favor of in the absence of, you know, a phased approach that you're suggesting, Mayor. I think there is a model for paying a ransom, and that's the agreement that Parks has with HHFT. They're getting 34 million, the Breakneck Bridge and Connector. They're getting an agreement where there's a guarantee that their operational and management costs will be covered for 20 to 40 years. So, to me, there should be a complementary agreement if that's if the fjord trail wants to come into Cold Spring, that they pay upfront capital costs for improvements, and they pay for the long-term maintenance costs that the village will face over the same period of time that they're contracted, 20 to 40 years. To me, that looks like $75 million up front, $5 million a year for 20 or 40 years. But I don't think the fjord trail have that, which goes to the funding questions and governance questions that you're talking about. Money simply isn't there. And I think they know that. They've raised $60,000 in 2 years from individual donations. So I don't see that that's not going to happen. But that's what should be on the table if they're serious about bringing the trail to Cold Spring. And yeah, I think that was it. Yeah, okay.
Anyone else?
It struck me, it struck me that, when you were all talking and including the planning board, that we're talking about a development. And so I thought in terms of Butterfield, I thought in terms of the lumber yard and Marathon. And the difference, and here's the hostage metaphor, is that it's not on our timetable. It's not going before our boards, and yet we still have to deal with it. And it's this big development. So with the development, generally, you're not thinking, oh, what's the big advantage for us to have it? It's usually about, okay, is it within our code, within our law? What are they trying to get away with? The developers generally come in wanting the moon. And you say, no, you can't have the moon. And you start whittling it down like we did with Butterfield, like Lumberyard. And you get it to a reasonable place. The difference with this one is that it has this sugar coating. Like, oh, how am I going to use this? How am I going to use this? And that takes it out of the realm of just here's a development, here's a developer, what are they trying to get? What can we give them? The one thing about the phasing that I thought was with this Marathon site that we worked so hard to get like into our zoning code so that we know, okay, it can be a phased thing, that every step of the way we can look at what's going on and decide, is this working? Isn't it working? I think we have to approach it like a development. That's all I have to say.
Phasing, just, if you ever feel like reading the zoning code, only strange and twisted people enjoy reading the zoning code. I know. We're in the same camp.
The shoe fits.
There's the PMU district, the planned multi-use. I'm so tired, I can't pull it right now. That development is set up very much in a phased way for exactly those reasons. And that was purposeful when the zoning code was rewritten. Anyone else? Hi.
Tom Tomato, 13 Stone Street. I have a little softer comment tonight. I want you to think back to what drew you to Cold Spring. When I was listening to the term community character, I thought about Betty Ann Shields' funeral last week. And in it, her daughter-in-laws talked about things that they had learned from Betty Ann. And one was, there's always time. And she would get in the car with Packy and she would say to him, let's scoop. And I could have cried hearing that because I get in the car with Phil, who I met and married after we dated senior year of high school at Haldane. And we get in the car and they say, let's scoop. So think about the charm of our community. Think about all of the wonderful people who live here, young, old, newcomer, old timer. And we look to you to protect our interests. When I was teaching and early in my career, we had a wonderful department head who ended every meeting by saying, anything else for the good of the order. And we're looking at you to come up with what's good for all of us. a large number of tourists. I never complain about that. I live down on Stone Street. I meet people from all over the world. But I am concerned about the increased number of visitors that we're going to have and the increase in cost. And so I'm looking
John, can you hear me? I can't hear them.
No, we lost the audio.
I think we lost it, yeah. Maybe it's
You can hear us now, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Sorry, we dropped out for a sec.
Anyone else in the room?
Meeting crashed.
Anyone else online who would like to make a comment or ask a question? Hearing none, thank you all for your time. And I appreciate everyone working through discussions tonight. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
All in favor? Aye.
Thanks, everybody.